Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. We are live. This is the INFOWARS Nightly News. Now, to my right over here, we have a glimpse of something to come in the days ahead, a little vision of the hell that we all face if we don't begin to turn this tyranny around. And we've got to start to talk about how did we arrive at this point in time. Everyone knows this is not an issue of the puppet president, Barack Obama, although they would love to divide people amongst themselves, those who hate him, those who love him, those who depend on him. But what we've really built over the past 100 years is a collectivist system, cherry-picked, run from behind the scenes, manipulated by little tiny people inside the elite class, the global cabal who now run this country. It's the robber barons who 100 years ago collected everything together under monopolies, began to control the industries, the oil, the railroads, the steel. And once they had that, they began a bigger combine. Meanwhile, the political systems that everyone's meant to buy into gradually collectivized more and more as they figured out what they want to do with masses of people in new, huge urban centers. Today, it's leading towards a virtual genocide, at least by control, at least a genocide of freedom itself. You've heard so much about Agenda 21. Well, I've seen the maps. I don't know if we can pull them up, that they're at the website America2050.org. It's this plan to double the urban populations in all the biggest centers around the country. They've divided us into 10, 11, maybe 12 regions that correspond loosely with the FEMA regions, that correspond with the HUD regions, the EPA regions, and bureaucratic tyranny is coming down upon us through the red tape, through endless regulation, through miles of so-called laws no one can ever read. Well, going back to the pre-World War II era, we saw the huge Great Depression, not only encircling the United States, but around the world. FDR, among others, demanded broad executive power. He was going to get us out of this mess by creating new agencies, new ways to get people back to work. But what it created was a system that could never be sustained. They started Social Security, they started benefits, and they gradually swamped them. It's not just the people inside the system, it's the way that the crony capitalists play off of, how they invest our money through those systems. Look at all the corruption from the bailout, 2008, the great collapse. We had to give these banks money. They were too big to fail. But what they were doing all along, they were taking our ordinary investments, our savings, our pension funds, state employees' pension funds, things people had saved up for over the decades, the Social Security lockboxes, they called them. All that money was traded on the derivatives market. They took the real savings, even though it's phony money through the Federal Reserve System, and traded that through derivatives, leveraged it out through other bets, got the system lined up in dominoes so that nobody could escape it, at least very few, and so they could wreck the whole system and gradually consolidate even more power. That's the collectivist tyranny we're now facing. That's where we're at with Obama, but it's been going on for a long time. It happened under George W. Bush, under Clinton, under the elder Bush. It was happening under Reagan, even though his rhetoric was better than others. And actually, that's a good graphic to show. We've got this gun graphic, and we're going to get into how Obama's coming after the Second Amendment. They've renegotiated talks with the United Nations for the Small Arms Treaty. And let's look at the map of how the world is armed. I think it's the other graphic, guys. Right here, you see the countries with the highest populations of firearms. And it's really just the United States in the 70 to 100% range. Everywhere else is shades in between, with all those green zones being virtually completely disarmed. Those who do have arms in those green zones you see are issued from the state. The state tells you if you can be armed. Well, that's a very, very dangerous balance of power. In between, you see Canada and different parts of Europe with partial gun rights. And then let's compare that to the gun crimes around the world. Now, admittedly, America does have its own share of crimes. It's in that medium zone between 1 and 5 incidents per 100,000 in the population. But look at the dark red areas, the high global gun death zones, places like Russia, large swaths of Africa, large swaths of Latin America and Mexico. Those areas have near total gun bans if you compare it again to those green zones and the shaded between green and blue zones on the other map of countries where you're allowed to have arms, and you can see where tyranny is a very bad recipe for death. And government is even worse, because throughout history, government has been the leading killer of populations. It has caused what is known as democide. That's an academic term for death by government. We've covered it in Alex's mini documentary, New World Order, Blueprint of Mad Men, and you've got to look up these statistics. You've got to look up the fact that Mao, Hitler, Stalin, Pol Pot, Castro, all these people went through with disarmament, and they also started centralizing the food supply, telling you who could sell food, who could run markets, and it's always led to depopulation. It's led to genocide. It's led to purposeful extermination at the hands of dictators. Look what Mao said on the subject of guns. It's right here in Paul Joseph Watson and Alex's special article, Why Obama Wants Your Guns and the Rest of Your Freedoms. Well, you've got Mao with his famous quote when he said, "Political power comes out of the barrel of the gun," and it leads to what you see over here, the fiery pits of hell. If we allow ourselves to be disarmed, we're inviting certain tyranny. That's the whole reason the Founding Fathers put the Second Amendment in place the way they did. And it's not just the Second Amendment, it's quotes from Founding Father after Founding Father, Washington, Jefferson, Adams, doesn't really matter. They all understood why it was important to have a hedge of power against government, so it couldn't usurp you, so it couldn't control your life, so it couldn't take everything over, because they'd have to come and take it from your cold, dead hands, as Charlton Heston once famously said, at one time so heavily involved with the NRA. But the bottom line is political power and arms do go together, and that's why we have to have a balance of power. That's why politically, under the Constitution and Bill of Rights, the individual is enshrined with a great number of innumerable rights, cannot be taken back. No one could take away the rights that God gave us to free speech, to our own consciences, to our religious convictions, and to our right to defend ourselves. It's just innate. Our right to privacy, all the other rights that we've seen whittled away under this tyranny as it's ratcheted up over the years since the monopoly powers took over 100 some odd years ago, since the eugenicists moved in with their philosophy that's so dark, since the Federal Reserve took over the printing and control of money and really started to wreak havoc on our system. And I mentioned FDR earlier, how he created the collectivist system, really got it rolling in a serious way in America, but he was only copying what Nazi Germany was doing. Goebbels praised FDR's moves to kind of match their system. They were only kind of mirroring what was done in the Soviet Union. It was happening in the UK under the Fabian Socialists. In fact, the Fabian Socialists are a very interesting group when it comes to bureaucratic tyranny, of state control, of this whole philosophy where the technocrats run things, make decisions, get into your lives in that big brother state, but at the same time declare that that state is God and that they decide who lives and dies. They decide if you're fit to breed, if you have the right to have children, if you have the right to stay alive. They said they'll exterminate you. That's a quote from George Bernard Shaw. All this stuff has been coming for a long time. I realize I'm jumping from areas to areas, but everywhere you see a centralizing of decision-making, of the control of our necessities, of the right to defense, of food, of water. You see really bad stuff slipping into place. Look what's happening now. Starting 30, 40 years ago, we began to subsidize the corn supply. We paid farmers not to plant. We began to export this corn around the world, and it's led to a total junk food diet where corporations dominate, they rake in the profits, and now they phased in the genetically modified seeds that are sterilizing us, that are causing organ failure, that are causing autoimmune reactions, new allergies, gut disorders. The same thing's happening with water through fluoridation and the other drugs. We're going to get to that in the main part of the nightly news, the other drugs they want to start putting in your water. This all comes down through a very systematic tyranny. I won't go on, but it's something we need to continue to talk about. It's never been just Obama. It's never been just Bush. It wasn't going to be just Romney. It's about the collectivist system we've invited in like a vampire, the system we need to undo through decentralization, through states' rights. And without further ado, I take you to tonight's nightly news.